Trilobites. We made it to trilobites. All right, let's start with a look at trilobite anatomy. And so they're going to be three major body segments. Those are the three lobes, although they go front to back, which is kind of weird. You'd think of lobes as being beside each other, perhaps. But you can see that those three body parts on the top actually cover up a lot of interesting things that are underneath. So here is a diagram of the underside of a trilobite. Here are actual pyritized trilobite underparts. You can see that they've got under that the cephalon, the head part, they have a variety of mouth parts. They've got these two antennae that are going to come out like that. And then when you get into the segments, so like if that's the head, then you're looking at the thorax essentially. You'll have these long sort of walking legs, and here they are sort of splayed out to the side. Here they are curled up inside. Mostly those would have been under the shell, that being the point of a shell, is to cover your precious little walking legs. And then you can maybe just barely see this sort of a ghost of a thing behind each of these legs, and you say, well, what's that? Trilobites had gills, and they had external gills, and they were there was one set between each of the legs. So every time a trilobite grew a new segment, and they do this during development, they will grow a segment at a time, a developmental program. It would include both a pair of appendages and a pair of gills on either side. And so that's going to be a feature that is identifying for trilobites, is the paired walking leg and gill combination running down the body. Also, the mouth parts are going to be potentially identifiable. However, there are a lot of trilobites out there for which we have no knowledge, no direct knowledge of what their legs and underparts were. We only have the kind of smooth or occasionally very spiky, you can see our little mascot today, outer shell. And so let's try to figure out trilobites. Let's go. Yeah. But this pyritization is just fantastic. These are from a place called Beecher's Trilobite Bed. And it is marvelous. These are tiny. They're like this big. But the pyrite replaced just all the hard parts really quickly and really perfectly. They are marvelous. Yeah. Okay. There are 11 or 12 different kinds of trilobites depending on what you do with one of these groups. And one of these other groups that's in here, the agnostids, may not really qualify as trilobites. A lot of these lacked eyes, although we believe this is secondary, that their progenitors had eyes and then gradually lost them. They tend to be adapted to deep water environments, and they go extinct by the end of the Ordovician, so they don't last long, but where you find them, you can find a ton of them. They're like very short little trilobites, very few middle segments, and a relatively large head covering, and pygidium, which is like the third segment, the tail segment, if you like. It's not really a tail, it's more like a disc, yeah. The rest of these groups do appear to stand up, and so this is showing roughly how they are thought to have evolved from fantastic site, trilobites.info, and very careful author on that site, actually a series of authors. They do a good job with this. There's another group, though, that we have some nice examples of from Chengjiang, and these are going to be the soft-bodied trilobite-like things. Naraoya is going to be the one that we have. And we have great preservation of the internal body parts, sometimes the legs, but they only have two body segments. They have the head and they have a thorax with the paired appendages running under it. But without that third segment, you can't really be in the trilobite club, can you? You can't be a bilobite if you're in the trilobite club. Yeah. But there are a lot of other things that have these paired gill and leg combinations and are trilobite adjacent. They're going to have a covering over the top, but may not actually be trilobites. think of the covering on a trilobite as like the outer shell on a car. I don't know if you've seen those shows where they do makeovers. You can just lift off that shell and you can put whatever you want on there. You can make your car into a giant hot dog looking thing that drives down the road. You can make it a huge chicken. I think somebody put a swimming pool on one on the internet just because. I don't know, probably got arrested right after. This covering is both the most identifiable part of trilobites, is the only part of trilobites you will probably ever see, and is potentially kind of misleading because it doesn't really tell you much about what's going on underneath. So, another thing that's related to trilobites are called morella, and they're named after a very famous and numerous fossil from the Burgess Shale. And so things that are like morella are called morellomorphs. And they look like this. This one has a sort of a solid shield that covers everything, but most morellas have a shield that's kind of like that. So there's big gaps in it. I don't know why that set off confetti, but good for me, good for you, good for all of us, I guess. I don't know. Here is a different Xylochorus. This is another morellomorph. This thing has a carapace that's kind of looks like a beetle at first. So you realize it's just one giant solid piece covering everything, but flip it over digitally. This is Silurian, and it's from the site where they grind them serially. And you'll see that they have little paired appendages, and you can see the individual little gills. Here's our little gills back here, next to the little walking legs. So, yeah. Here's a zoomed in thing focusing on the gills, which are next to the walking legs, and the different morphologies of the different appendages that are right up there near the mouth. And so these presumably have specialized feeding functions, given that they are near the mouth, and that's usually what goes on near the mouth. Yeah, I can say from expert opinion. Modern arthropods, many of them will be sexually dimorphic in that they will have a set of claspers for mating, and you would normally find these on the male. You'll get these extra little limbs on things like pycnogonids. These are sea spiders, I guess people call them. They're not spiders. They are in the sea. Yeah, it's a decent try, I guess. But yeah, they're fully awesome. And the males will sometimes actually carry the fertilized eggs along underneath them with these little claspers after they're done mating. So they stick around. They do the hard work, which is nice to see. But it was recently discovered that on trilobites, when you do get preservation of the limbs, which is super rare, and even when they are, you'd have to get a trilobite that's flipped upside down to be able to see that, and they usually don't want to get flipped upside down. Yeah, something probably already happened to it, the dead making kind of something, for you to be able to see that. But yeah, there are a couple of modified limbs down here, and these are thought to be sort of claspers. Which would be a marker of male trilobites, which would be great if you got trilobite legs preserved very often. But you do see modified mating appendages on a variety of arthropods, euarthropods. So there we go. Where are those? Well, let's see them here. Yeah, and so this is a dissection, because remember, even though a fossil may look flat, you can often still dissect away the layers. It's just the layers are very thin. And so they've dissected away some of the carapace and seen what's underneath, and lo and behold, part and counterpart right over here. Let's zoom in on those. What have we got? We've got regular legs up here, sort of long and thick and doing stuff. Here's some regular legs down here. Good for walking, that sort of thing. And look at these. Big, chubby first little segment here, and then a long, sort of spiny clasper. Those are almost certainly the male clasping appendage of trilobites. Yeah, just big, big, thick thing. So there you go. Yeah. You can also sometimes, occasionally, spot female trilobites. There are a group of trilobites that have something that looks kind of like a little, it's like a little surfboard that sticks out, like a little peninsula on the front of the cephalon. And most of the time you will see that fossilized and there's nothing there, but occasionally you get fossils and there's a big sort of ball there. And that is thought to be a female, and that is thought to be a little pouch full of eggs. Kind of like when a spider makes that little ball of eggs that then turns into a little ball of babies, and they all crawl out and go everywhere. Yeah, spiders are fun. And so potentially either the formation of this structure could be sexually dimorphic, or it could be the use of the structure. It may be present in both, but it may be used differently for storing babies in the female. Yeah. Or the male. Who's to say this is the female? Yeah, it could be either, really. But yeah, a brood pouch, potentially female on a trilobite. Now, even better evidence, I think, comes from that Beecher's trilobite bed. And what you can see here, you can look at it and say, wow, those are great looking trilobites. If you were to go to the Yale Peabody Museum website, they have lots of very good high-resolution pictures of their fossils, including they have a whole bunch of trilobites from this bed. And so these are Triarthris. And look what's tucked under some of these little parts up here near the front. Little tiny golden, fool's golden, pyretized eggs. Yeah, they have eggs, and the eggs are only partially mineralized, or at least partially pyretized. Here they're zooming in on it. You can see just little patches where the pyrite was just sort of growing over presumably the leathery coating on the outside of these little eggs. But yeah, those are trilobite eggs. And so presumably this is a sexually dimorphic trait that we were looking at. But you don't find eggs on every single dead trilobite. They weren't all pregnant all the time. At least, half of them weren't pregnant all the time. And so it's only occasionally that you would be able to see these features. But when you do, that is very revealing. Now, what happens to a little trilobite after it hatches? We actually have fossils from some species and some places. So this is Dimerophagy, yeah. And it actually goes through really substantial metamorphosis. It's got three main life stages. The protapsid, right here, that's when it, protaspid, yeah, there we go, put the accent correctly. That is, these are the earliest stages, so the just hatched little egg. And you can see it's basically developing first what's going to become the head. You get your little eye spots coming in here from the side. That develops a little miniature version of what is going to become the middle segment. But in the protaspid, the larva is not segmented. So there's no bending. There's no differentiation where one plate begins and another ends. This process, and we don't really understand how this took place in trilobites precisely, but is going to happen in the meraspid stage. So protaspid first, meraspid second, and this is where it is going to increase the number of segments in the middle. So it started out with no segments, then it put in what looks like baby's first segment, maybe, but actually probably it's just this little thing here at the back of the cephalon. And then it's going to start adding individual little segments in between. And so you're going to go from very few to more. And then finally, it will reach a certain point. Most trilobite species, at least all the ones that I know, have a fixed number of segments that you will find in the middle of every single one of them. And so you can tell the difference between a very small adult and one of these larval stages, meraspid stages, because you can count the segments and compare those. And you can see that these have some features like this long sort of spine that's actually coming from one of the middle segments that develop, fairly late. And this would presumably be a hindrance to something that wanted to put the trilobite in its mouth and crunch it. And you can see as they get bigger, the problem of predation gets greater, or they're in a better position to deal with the problem of predation, and so they've developed these great big spikes either side of the cephalon, and this particular kind has also developed a middle spike. So protaspid, meraspid, holaspid, because it's the whole trilobite. Yeah, the whole ass trilobite. All right, we did it. Yeah. Look at these trilobites. We'll go over this in class, but have a look at it. Think for yourself. We've got the same organisms here, but they look different and they're showing us different things. And so what you want to ask is, all right, in each case, what could bring these together and what does this show? Yeah. And the clue here would be that trilobites are not just ecdysozoans, but also arthropods, euarthropods. And so they definitely would have shed their exoskeletons at some point. Yeah, I'll put that out there. Or, there are always catastrophic ways for mass mortality, which is also definitely a possibility for what happened in either of these, with different degrees of decomposition. In some of the earliest trilobites, so these are ampics. These are from Fezuata Formation in Morocco, and we have some very nice early echinoderms from that formation that you will see. You get these ampics trilobites, and they have a great big long spike coming out of the front of the cephalon, which is neat. And there's our thorax, and pygidium is at the back. You see these things had 6 segments at maturity, 6 middle segments, and so here you can see a large one, here you can see a small one. They both have 6. And big long spines. And the interesting thing with these is that when you find this particular species, most of the individuals that are found are doing this. Yeah. They're all in a line, and sometimes there are other animals in the line. Like this is a totally different kind of Phacopid, I think, trilobite. And it's just sort of worked its way in there. But yeah, the ampixes are always found, not always, but mostly found in these lines. The Phacopids are mostly not, or whatever that trilobite is. Yeah. And so the question has always been, well, why? What's going on? So there's an idea that there might have been something lying there, like something like a dead... This is too early for anything like a log, but some sort of plant matter that they're sort of clustered under, possibly. Another idea is that this is some sort of mating ritual, that they're all coming together the way there's like red crabs that'll all spawn at the same time and get together and just sort of mass fertilization parties. Also possible, yeah. But yeah, kind of a mystery. So here are some early trilobites, and this is a very big early trilobite. This is Redlickia rex. Yeah, it's giant. So this is a coin showing you for size. It's like that big. Yeah, just huge. And it's a very early trilobite as well. So some of them could be quite big. And trilobites filled a number of niches, we think, and were specialized in different ways. There are trilobites that have massive stacks of eyes that would have had very good sort of almost 360-degree vision. And the eyes are set apart so that they would have potentially some three-dimensionality to that. And so these are presumably, they would have potentially done well as predators. There are other trilobites that have lost their eyes completely. These are going to be benthic only and fairly deep benthic detritivores. They're going to eat rotting stuff, dead stuff like that. And you have a bunch of trilobites that are sort of in the middle. They sort of plow along, leaving those little ichnofossils that we know and love, and looking for something probably dead to put in their mouths. But yeah, a range of things that trilobites can be. So don't think of them as only scavengers. Some of these things almost certainly hunted. Yeah. So this is a trilobite, Redlickia rex, and Redlickia rex has these specialized mouth parts. So it has some of these legs which are modified, and they have the gill on them because they always have the gill on them. But these legs have a first segment, and look at that first segment. It's got teeth. And so these are going to be facing into the middle. And so when the trilobite pounces on something, it can just move its legs together, and it's basically chopping up whatever it is it just caught with scissors. Yeah, yeah. And it's got a lot of different legs, so it can pin down the organism while it is grinding it up. And these are some coprolites that are found in the same formation where you get Redlickia rex. They were originally thought to be from something big like an Anomalocaris, but it turns out that they are almost certainly Redlickia rex coprolites. And so these are pieces of what appear to be either other trilobites, or this may actually be a chopped up Anomalocaris that Redlickia rex ate. The old paradigm was that trilobites are these poor little, herding animals, and that Anomalocaris pounces down and shreds them. It's just a top predator. But we may have actually had that reversed in this particular case. So yeah, Redlickia rex, kind of a neat one. Yeah. Here's a paper that I don't know how much stock I put in, but Cambrian cannibals. So these are agnostid trilobitomorphs, maybe trilobites, but let's put them in trilobitomorph because they're close, but they're not very trilobite-y. They're not extremely trilobite-y, other than having 3 lobes. Their other parts are a little different. And what they pointed out is that in places where you find these, you will find a bunch of them, but they'll tend to be swarming around. There'll be a few that are perhaps upside down or are little broken pieces that could in no way have come from the same living individual. And what they speculate in here, and they have stats and stuff to back it up, is that these things were not just scavengers, but they were, at least in part, scavenging their own. They were little cannibals. Yeah. So possibly arthropod on arthropod, yes, within the same species, cannibalism. Which, I don't know, it could be. But they record numerous instances where you'll have like an older one and it's overlapping a partial, often younger one, where it looks like it may be sort of stripping what's left of the flesh off or trying to extract some nutrients from the shed carapace of another one of these trilobites. You have some of them that have potential damage, like these little chunks out of the pygidial margin. Could be bite marks. Yeah, somebody taking a little bite of them. I'm not as sold on that, but it is possible for sure. So all the ones in red were samples where they had no evidence for cannibalism. All the ones in blue were where they had some evidence for cannibalism. Yikes. Yeah. All right. Also, let's talk about trilobite eyes. Trilobite eyes are fantastic. They've actually evolved several different kinds of eyes, holocroal, schizocroal, and abathocroal eyes. These were probably the first. These end up being the most common. These got to start really early, and they're found very widely. The difference, they're all going to have lenses, and the lenses are usually going to be made of calcite. So nice little clear optical calcite lenses. They're modified in much the same way as you would modify a lens if you wanted to focus the light on a particular point. So they have biologically evolved. Not quite glass because it's calcite, but that's the idea, optical calcite. And they'll be either separated from each other by a little membrane on the schizocroal eye, separated by each other by a sort of a wide space on the abathocroal eyes, which there's usually not very many little spots there, or just crammed as close together as possible on the holocroal eyes. Yeah. And over time, what you see is that the number of little spots on the compound eyes goes up really fast, really high. From the Cambrian, where even having a couple of eye spots probably made you just the best at finding things to eat or things to kill. And then you can see the arms race kick in as we move into the Cambrian and into the Ordovician. And trilobite eyes just get completely out of hand. There are a couple of big eyes that are thought to be maybe from an anomalocarid in the Emu Bay Shale, which is sort of early Cambrian, around the time of Burgess Shale and stuff like that. They're still trying to figure out exactly who those eyes come from. So here are some of the different types of compound eyes that you get in trilobites, and they're always going to be found on the cephalon, usually going to be found on the edge, when trilobites molt, the piece called the cheek is actually going to come away from the central piece called the glabella. There's also going to be a fracture between the cephalon and the thorax, and the new baby trilobite is going to sort of split its head plates open and then crawl out over top of the head. There's actually a couple of these that they have caught in the act of molting, which is pretty cool. Caught them with their own molted carapace. But the eyes are going to be right at the border, so they're going to stay with the center. They do not go with the cheeks. And so if you can see the little line dividing where the cheeks would be able to split off, like it's a separate plate, that's where you look for the eyes. There are trilobites that have lumps and bumps that are not eyes, and that's how you can kind of tell them apart. So there you go. Those are some general features of trilobites. I hope that was fun. Trilobites are good. All right, thanks.